Veganism is rising in the United States. Roughly 10 million Americans self-identify as vegans. In the span of 6 years, from 2012 to 2018, the number of vegans has tripled from comprising 1 to 3% of the population. According to the Food Marketing Institute, a third of Americans have begun to incorporate plant-based foods into their diets, and 23% say they're consuming less meat. The Plant-Based Foods Association also reports an 11% growth in retail sales of plant-based foods in 2018, putting a market value of $4.5 billion on the sale of plant-based products. To explain these significant dietary trends, as well as the growth of the plant-based market, veganism has been decoupled from the animal rights movement and positioned as a lifestyle movement. Most vegans in the United States tend to be white, middle class, and female identified, despite some media and advocacy efforts to center veganism as a largely white phenomenon or position animal rights and social justice as if they're in conflict. Many vegans are people of color. Although roughly 13% of the United States population, 8% of African Americans report being vegan. In the last year, people of color also reported eating 31% less meat in comparison to white people who reported eating 10% less. Arguments in support of animal welfare, environmental sustainability, health, or a combination of all three are often credited with motivating people to eat less meat or adopt a plant-based diet. These three primary frames also undergird veganism as a lifestyle movement, yet their efficacy is debated among leaders in the vegan community. Even though multiple calls have been made to align animal and human liberation, empirical research testing the efficacy of racial justice as a primary motivation for becoming vegan, particularly among people who do not already identify as vegan, is lacking. Inspired by critical animal studies, as well as the scholarship and activism of vegans of color, I aim to bring racial justice to the center of empirical analyses of veganism as a lifestyle movement. To this end, racialized perceptions about who is or may become vegan, coupled with these racial demographic trends, present us with two fascinating sociological questions. What frames most likely impact people's potential decisions to adopt a plant-based diet? And are some of these frames more important than others when considering a person's racial identity? To address these questions, I've designed an experiment embedded within a national computer-based survey of 2,000 people residing in the United States. The aim of the experiment is to capture potential participation in veganism as a lifestyle movement based on a person's likelihood of adopting a plant-based diet when presented with a particular motivational frame. Motivational frames in the experiment include animal rights, environmental sustainability, health, racial justice, social networks, and popular culture trends. I also control for barriers to dietary change, including food access, time, money, cultural tradition, and support. The survey is currently being administered by Qualtrics, and I anticipate the dataset being complete in the next few weeks. In the remainder of this presentation, I first introduce veganism as a lifestyle movement. I then present animal rights, environmental sustainability, and health as typical motivational frames of the lifestyle movement. Next, I add racial justice as a necessary primary frame in this model. And finally, I discuss the design of the experiment meant to test the potential of dietary change based on the 6 types of motivational frames previously noted. To understand the rise in veganism, Beeman analytically distinguishes veganism from the animal rights social movement. She then positions the vegan movement as a lifestyle movement, as depicted in her table comparing social and lifestyle movements, source of identity, type of engagement, social change tactics, and change agents differ between these two movement types. First, the source of identity in social movements comes from ideology and social position. In comparison, the source of identity in lifestyle movements comes from lifestyle choice. Second, in social movements, political action organized through social movement organizations is targeted at corporations or the state. In contrast, lifestyle movements encourage economic action. Third, in social movements, social change is expressed through collective protest. Conversely, in lifestyle movements, change is achieved not through boycott or buyout, but through individual consumption choices in everyday life that are believed to compound into broader cultural values. Finally, grievances in social movements are expressed through activists, whereas cultural entrepreneurs are the change agents in lifestyle movements. While activists often employ confrontational tactics like protests or demonstrations, cultural entrepreneurs rely on consensus-based tactics, stressing cooperation as well as compromise. Rather than challenging institutional structures head-on, cultural entrepreneurs are the academics, celebrities, chefs, athletes, doctors, filmmakers, and authors, among others, who bring veganism into the mainstream. To illustrate the difference between lifestyle and social movements further, let's turn to a children's book called Vegan is Love. Children's book authors are often skilled at taking broad concepts and boiling them down into pointed messages. Ruby Roth does this well. As we'll see in her introduction, Roth reconceptualizes veganism as a lifestyle, centering individual choice to economic action and individual consumption. She writes, "How wonderful, at this very moment, every person, big and small, has the power to create a better world. We don't have to wait to grow older for laws to change or for presidents to be elected. We can begin right now. We can choose to live without using animals for food, clothing, or fun. As vegans, we live this way because it's best for our health, for animals, and for the earth, and that is love. Many people know that animals around the world are treated badly, yet they turn their minds away. To be vegan means to care deeply about how our choices help or harm animals, how we create peace or suffering in the world. Our choices are powerful. Vegan is love." In this introduction, Roth, acting as a cultural entrepreneur, draws on three distinguishing features of lifestyle movements. First, she defines what it means to be vegan as making ethical choices. In terms of lifestyle movements, a person's source of identity comes from the choices they make. Second, when Roth highlights participation at any age and couples it with not needing to impact law or national leadership, she nods to the potential of purchasing power through fulfillment of daily needs. As choice makers, people are believed to be able to engage with and change the world around them through economic action. As the adage goes, people can not only vote at the poll, but with their pocketbooks. Finally, when Roth points us to choices about not exploiting animals for food, clothing, or fun, she's orienting economic action towards individual consumption. As she notes, our choices are powerful. Although lifestyle movements rely on action at the individual level, these individual choices directed at the market are thought to have the power to alter market landscapes. Before leaving Vegan is Love, I also want to point out that Roth uses her introduction to frame primary issues targeted by a vegan lifestyle. She writes, "As vegans, we live this way because it's best for our health, for animals, and for the earth, and that is love." Framing veganism through the lens of healthism, speciesism, and environmentalism is also commonplace in academic literature. For example, Yeaman depicts how concern for health, animals, and the environment overlays veganism as a lifestyle movement with the animal rights social movement, as well as the plant-based food tribe. She writes, "Each movement is distinguished by the isms, the ideologies with which they're most concerned. The animal rights movement is most concerned with speciesism and secondarily with environmentalism. The plant-based tribe primarily with healthism and environmentalism, and the vegan movement with all three. These connections offer insights into the rich tapestry of social meanings, as well as reveal loci of internal tensions that stem from different moral preoccupations." Given this framework, where might racial justice fit in this tapestry? Like the particular ism focus in animal rights in the vegan lifestyle movement, the racial justice movement is distinguished by a focus on racism. Its addition to this framework also adds to the loci of tensions that stem from the perceived difference in the underlying moral drivers of change. To this end, racial justice tends to lack a focus on animal rights. For example, Black Lives Matter assumes that the primary path to racial justice is through human liberation. Racism and structural race-based inequality are the problems. To a large extent, animal rights is a moot point until racial justice becomes a reality. On the other hand, animal rights lacks a focus on racial justice. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals assumes that the primary path to animal rights is through animal liberation. Speciesism and the structural exploitation of animals are the problems. This conflict is problematic because we live in a time where racial inequality, animal exploitation, and environmental degradation interact to produce compounding effects. All need to be collectively addressed and remedied before any single issue can be fully resolved. Although a humble contribution, this project aims to further unravel the tension between racial justice and veganism to better understand its complexity. This project serves as a precursor to literature focusing on dietary change through direct social campaign participation and acknowledges that people need different motives to change their behavior. There's no one-size-fits-all message to promote a vegan diet. Participants were randomly selected based on membership in the broader population, not membership in a vegan campaign. I then asked him to engage with dietary change motivational factors as they relate to veganism as a lifestyle movement. People do not have to be part of an organization to adopt the lifestyle. The aim is to measure the motivational effects to gauge who may be inclined to participate in the lifestyle, given this growing movement's messaging. This experiment reflects an attempt to look outside of animal rights and racial justice movements in hopes of providing each with collective fuel. Taking Gieman's explanation of veganism as a lifestyle movement as a launch point, motivational vignettes emphasize information about animal rights, environmental sustainability, and health. To this model, I add racial justice, personal networks, and popular culture trends. To begin, all respondents were asked what percentage of your meals last week were plant-based containing no animal products. They were also given definitions of plant-based and animal products. Respondents used a sliding bar to position their percentage of plant-based meals on a scale ranging from 0 to 100%. Respondents were then randomly assigned to treatment and control groups. There were 6 treatment groups, one for each motivational frame. Motivational frames were developed based on research finding as well as popular culture media. For the sake of time, I'll provide a brief summary of each. The animal rights motivational frame speaks to the emotional lives and intelligence of cows. Environmental sustainability highlights the relationship between livestock and global warming. Health connects shortened lifespan to the consumption of animal products. Racial justice shows the disproportional impact of factory farming on communities of color. Social networks position a plant-based diet as a norm among close friends. And popular culture depicts a plant-based diet through celebrity as something that's aspirational. After receiving one motivational frame, respondents were asked on a scale of 1 to 7, to what extent does this information impact your likelihood of adopting a plant-based diet? Next, respondents in the treatment group were given a control prompt. The purpose of the prompt is to measure engagement with these motivational frames while holding common barriers to dietary change constant. It serves to theoretically level and eliminate common barriers to dietary change to clearly demonstrate any potential effects of the motivational frames. Pulling from Gracian's findings about the most common, often interrelated barriers to dietary change, I developed a control prompt to accompany the motivational vignettes. With the motivational frame still in mind, participants in the treatment group were then received this control prompt. It read, imagine you're in charge of meal planning, buying food, and preparing it in your home next week. You have access to fresh, affordable, high-quality plant-based food at your local grocery store. You also found some plant-based recipes that take no more than 30 minutes to make. The food fits well with family tradition, and all those in your household offer to make a dietary change if you want to. Finally, accounting for their treatment motivational frame as well as the control prompt, treatment group respondents were asked to consider their meal plans for next week and report on a scale from 0 to 100% of how many of their meals would be plant-based. In comparison, the control group did not receive any motivational frame. They also did not receive the control prompt. Respondents in this group were only asked to report on a scale of 0 to 100 their percentage of plant-based meals last week, as well as the anticipated percentage of meals next week. In conclusion, at the broadest level, this project serves to deepen our understanding of what role food plays in reflecting people's values. Upon receipt of the data, I'll explore the potential impact of vegan lifestyle motivation frames among different racial groups. To begin, I'll examine difference in the reported percentage of a person's meals last week and their reported percentage in meals next week to see who's more likely to dabble in the dietary aspect of veganism given the treatment vignette. While leaving room for unexpected findings to emerge, I expect that this research will expand scholarship on veganism as a lifestyle movement. In addition, I also hope to provide advocates and cultural entrepreneurs with information needed to further elevate interactional effects of animal abuse, environmental degradation, and racial inequality as core facets of the broader social movement. I close with gratitude. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What's going on with my video? That's very strange. Okay. So thank you very much, Victoria, for that really amazing presentation. Again, I'm thinking about the methodology. I'd love to talk to you more about that. There are a couple of questions for you in the chat, but we'll hold questions until the end. We have Miri up next. And again, kind of continuing this conversation around veganism. There you go. Perfect.
Hi, everyone. So this presentation is based on one of the chapters in my dissertation. My dissertation largely tracks moral markets in general, but focuses on the cruelty-free cosmetics industry and the vegan food market. So this is kind of an overview of where this market started and where it will be going. And I started my research really looking at an empirical puzzle. Since 2015, the vegan food market has grown exponentially in the US and the UK. And now vegan products are about 16 to 19% saturation in the dairy industry in both countries. And I would add to that to say that since 2019, 1 out of 4 new product launches in food was a vegan product. And that is across categories. It might be in the dairy section, in the meat section, in the snack aisle. So it's no longer contained within, health or the small vegan aisle that we have in the US. If you go to the UK, it's already set right next to the animal-based analogs. Now, meat analogs have passed 1% saturation. I know it sounds very small, but it is a huge number in dollar size of that market. And as of 2020, the industry has reached close to $6 billion market size globally, just for meat analogs, and is expected an annual growth rate of 15%. This actually was spurred on by the pandemic. We have seen cash register data that shows that people are buying more vegan products, more plant-based products the moment COVID hit, with a unique increase in Asian markets that were not really the huge participants of vegan consumption that isn't their traditional, tofu. So does it mean that we have over 10% of our population being vegan? No, it does not. Most surveys put the vegan population in the US and the UK around 1 to 1.5%. Some do go to 3%. However, they do say it is for this point in time that they are adopting a plant-based diet. And when you revisit those people, it sometimes fluctuates. So the most stable number I could get was 1.5%. That made me question, how is this market growing? What is the consumer base that is propelling this market to kind of shoot to the stratosphere, so to speak? The other puzzle was the theoretical puzzle. Moral markets, what are they? I take Max Weber's definition of value rationality as a moral market. A moral market is basically our desire to realize substantial goals through organizations. In this case, the goal is to live our values of animal rights through our consumption and production of animal-free products. And according to Balsinger, which is one of the leading theoretical minds and researchers in moral markets have both producers and consumers, which prioritize moral-oriented or value-oriented mission of the market before profit-making or savings of this market. We usually call it a value premium, right? If you want to buy organic, you pay more. If you want to buy vegan, you pay more, because you're willing to sacrifice monetary gain to live out your values. And usually, until recently, we have seen moral markets as these little niche markets where all participants, or at least most of the participants, kind of know that they're participating in it for morality as well as the experience of those products. So if vegans only account for 1% of the population, but the vegan food market has expanded so rapidly past them as core consumers. Is it still a moral market? Who is in this market, right? And this is what I'll try to answer in this presentation. So the first stage of the vegan market happened around the 1980s to 1990s and kind of stagnated afterwards. The early stage is identified as a product by vegans for vegans. These are some of the quotes that my interviewees gave me. I've interviewed 60 industry executives and founders of vegan companies, as well as plant-based advocates, food compliance lawyers, and these kind of represent the spirit of the first generation of this market. Of a quote from Maya, which is a very well-known female entrepreneur in the vegan market, says, "I was vegan for long before I started my business. Before making vegan food, I wrote cooking books for vegans. I just felt like there wasn't enough out there for vegans. And after a while thinking about it, I've decided to start my own business." So here we identify a problem, right? We have this value that, you know, as Victoria said, is a lifestyle choice, right? And we are constricted in the market from enacting that choice. So Maya, like others, decided to do something about it and became an entrepreneur as a vegan for other vegans. And then we have Dan. Dan is also a business owner. He started out as an fitness expert, but also he loves junk food, right? Not all vegans are healthy vegans. And he says, well, I'm vegan for almost 25 years now. He started when he was a kid. I'm a fitness expert. And if you're a healthy vegan, there's no pizza for you. It's really hard to find good brand frozen pizza that's also vegan and healthy. So we started making something in our home kitchen. And once we had that going, we moved to production, as well as they sell now in health stores, and they're getting into, you know, major retail chains, but the notion is still there. We had a problem as vegans. We solved it for us as vegans and other vegans. I had other interviewees basically telling me, I suffered every year during the holidays. That is why I invented a holiday product, right? Or I didn't want to eat anything from animals and there was nothing for me, so I started making it. Now, those products were not the most innovative, they were not the most tasteful, but they were the beginning of the market. And us as being moral consumers and a part of this community, we thrived at the notion of having something to purchase. So the creation stage was focused on the vegan identity and the needs of vegans in the food industry. It was self-motivating need to purify through consumption from the animal-based food industry, right? You don't want to be a part of that, so we're creating something new. A lot of them went directly to health stores. In the US, they contacted mainly Whole Foods, which was considered the most progressive grocer at the time, kind of knowing that their audience would go to those places. And this helped distinguish the vegan market from other markets, right? It could have been a part of the health industry, it could have been a part of the natural foods industry, but it became the vegan market because of this insistence that it is by vegans and for vegans. What happened next? What happened next was the expansion stage. We are in it right now. The first decade of the 2000s seemed relatively quiet and stagnant. However, behind the scenes, things were happening. And what we've seen in the last decade was the result of those things happening. Products that arrived in markets in 2015 and onwards were developed from 2008 until 2010. They started their development. We see them now. For instance, Beyond Meat started developing Beyond Meat in 2010. It took them almost 10 years of R&D to perfect their product. And there was a move from the identity base of being an ethical vegan to an action-based participation. This introduced us to new consumers. One consumption identity that is new is the flexitarian or reducitarian, right? This is the regular meat eater that says, I want to eat less meat. So in addition to eating meat, sometimes during the week, I would eat plant-based. And so there was also a move in labeling from vegan to plant-based to attract those consumers. And these new products now cater more to the omnivore palate than they do the vegan palate. And this is why we see the Impossible Whopper, right? Or the Beyond Burger. And we see them in all sorts of fast food chains. As one of these executives told me, our audience is not vegans. We are a vegan product, but our audience is not vegans. Our audience is meat eaters. So what did this mean? The consumer base has grown from a niche population to the average consumers in many cases. And cash register data shows that out of all Beyond Meat consumers, 94 of them buy Beyond Meat along with animal-based meat. Only 6 of the consumers are vegetarians or vegans. New market incumbents are coming in. There's a growth in producers, but there's also generational replacement. New industry leaders that do not share the same sentiments and goals as the founders of the market are now leading the market. This is no longer a vegan market by vegans for vegans. We also have now new vegan NGOs that are solely based on and focused on food, which is, it kind of switched here. It's the GFI, not FGI, Good Food Institute in the US. And in Europe, we see ProVeg. Both of them are food-focused organizations. What does it mean that they're food focused? It means that they're trying to promote plant-based solutions in the market and have detached themselves from their original social movement, animal rights movement activism. Now we're moving from identity as the base of the market to action, and there is a difference. You no longer need to be vegan to participate in this market. You just need to eat or produce vegan products. The separation is from the action itself to the moral motivation. The cost of the expansion is the entrance of large meat producers, such as Maple Leaf, that has bought out the Light Life hot dog brand, the Field Roast brand, the Chow brand, and now has a different company called Greenleaf under them to kind of purchase and diversify with them. You have Tyson Foods that are entering this. They're investing in so many plant-based alternatives. They were one of the earliest investors in Beyond Meat, and they divested from them before the IPO. And you have JBS, which is arguably the largest meat producer in the world, trying to enter the vegan market to capitalize on plant-based proteins. If you would go to these companies' websites, they are no longer meat producers, they are protein producers. And this is extremely important to understand, because proteins are not a challenging concept, right? We all need to eat protein. and there is no suggestion of the animals involved in the process. And I want to give you a quote from Tom, who was one of the leaders of this change, and how he reacts to that. And he says, I don't think these are the best companies in the world, but I think we can't change the industry without them. Without them, the market doesn't change. Tyson has reach into all distribution areas of food. If they're going to be involved, Tyson has the ability to take a product and take it everywhere, right? So for Tom, who's a market mediator and the chief research officer at an alternative meat company, the choice is obvious, right? I don't care that they're not vegan. If they can take me to every consumer, I will work with them. And he's not the only one. But I'll continue with his reasoning because it was reflected with a lot of people. I think that what has been shown is that telling people that eating meat is bad doesn't change their behavior. These are lessons that were learned from a lot of senior executives at PETA that moved into different endeavors. They all say that. This is kind of how this place, this organization was born. People like to eat stuff that tastes good. So what changed when the vegan market began expanding is that companies now are creating products that taste great and don't require animals. We have people that come into this with the environmental perspective, and the fact that they help animals is great. So here the goal is to help animals regardless of your motivation. It could be taste, money, environment, they don't care. Could be animal concerns as well, but that's just a bonus. It is the action that promotes the animal welfare, not the identity of veganism anymore in the producer's perspective. Looking at industry execs, right? What do they think? People that have been around for a long while. I think it's cool to see that these companies are getting involved because these animal companies have the infrastructure and the knowledge of how to market these products and frankly, how to make them. All these products, once you have the formula, it's actually the same process to make them and the same distribution channels. We need these companies for the market to move forward. This says Dylan. He founded and was the CEO of a vegan food company. And he thinks this is a good idea, right? This is the prevalent notion amongst the producers of the expansion phase. We should work with animal companies because we want to expand it to everyone. Is this still a moral market then? We had new entrants in this market that are now considered moral, even though they differ from what is vegan, right? So plant-based, which is basically vegan without the animal rights ethic, was the first step, but not the last. Now we're looking at cultivated meats that are lab grown, still using biopsies from animals. We're looking at fermented dairy, which is dairy proteins that are grown on flora through fermentation. And we're looking from the meat companies to a push for blended products, which is plant-based protein mixed with animal-based protein. And many of the new actors entering the market, including large corporations like Nestle, basically want to capitalize on the consumer desire to reduce meat. Do these companies invest more in plant-based and less in animal-based? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. And if we look at the final test, right, is the increase in plant-based consumption shrinking the meat industry? No, it is not. While in the US and the UK, you buy more meat analogs, people still consume similar amounts of animal-based meats. US exports of meats have increased in the last 5 years due to the rise in demand in Asia. And the only industry that is making strides in terms of reducing animal harm is the dairy industry, because consumer behavior differs there, right? You would only buy one type of a dairy product to a household. You won't buy 3 or 4 kinds, unlike with meats and proteins. So if we look at all of this, is this still a moral market? Now it is a vegan market for non-vegans. We have animal rights activists that are kind of being pushed away from this market. All the while we have industry leaders that still advocate for reducing animal harm and creating a world that has no animals in the food. So this market has changed, and I would leave you with the question of, is it still a moral market? Thank you so much. Please, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. This is my email. I'll also put it in the chat. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neri. We have a number of questions again coming up in the chat, which is great. And we'll get to those after Carol's presentation, who's talking to us about joining human animal studies and vegans and public sociology in the classroom. So yeah, take it away, Carol.
Right. Thank you. So you might wonder how this fits in, because the goal was to do the promise of vegan sociology. We wanted to focus on students of the ASA. And as you saw, we have very impressive graduate students doing amazing research that's going to bring vegan sociology forward. And so one thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit about undergraduate students specifically. So I'm just wondering, I actually can't see the chat. Let me see, there it is. If people want to just put in the chat, if any of you teach or think you might teach in the future, that would be nice to know, so that I know if I have people in the audience who I'm speaking to. So maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself and if you teach. So today's presentation, I want to talk about joining human animal studies as a class or a discipline with the discipline of public sociology for the sake of reducing speciesism through classroom work, specifically through the pedagogical techniques of experiential learning and service learning. So, So I want to talk a little bit about public sociology, short-term experiential learning, and service learning as a background. So if you're not familiar with it, public sociology is focused on expanding the field of sociology beyond just academic outcomes to real-world impact and application. So public sociology can look like a lot of different things. It includes things like applying research skills in an applied setting, so maybe to help a nonprofit organization or an advocacy group, an activist effort, a community initiative, and it could also be using sociological insights to publicly advocate for a cause. So using your platform as a sociologist to do things like write letters to the editor, expert testimonials, and public speeches. Importantly, and it looks like we have a number of people who do teach in the audience, so hopefully this will be useful to you. As people who teach, we also bring real applications of sociology into the classroom. And we have the potential to not just teach our content matter, but to also teach simultaneously to teach students how to be active and ethical citizens in the world. So there are a couple different ways you could do this pedagogically, and I want to highlight the idea of experiential learning and service learning as ways to do this. So an introduction to experiential learning, I'm just going to use a quotation here that explains it from the Experiential Learning Institute. And after I talk, I'll put some links in the chats to some easy resources for both of these types of learning. So this is a 4-step learning process. It's applied multiple times in every interaction and experience. You have an experience, you reflect on it, you think on it, and then you act. It's a learning process initiated by a very concrete experience, and then you build things around it that allow students to react, think, and you build action into it. I want to focus, this is a good kind of learning because the cycle is very natural and organic. And so this quote tells us the cycle is so natural and organic that people engage in it without being aware that they're learning. It happens almost effortlessly all the time and is consistently transforming our lives. This is especially true in short-term experiential learning. So experiential learning projects that don't take a whole semester, they might just be a one-time event. Students don't really realize they're doing experiential learning, but it can have the same impacts. So these are like field trips, observations, participant observations, maybe projects where people examine their lifestyle or play around with their lifestyle, or it could be like a one-time community service event. So I want to give you some examples. So here is an example from my class on human animal studies. I have kind of a menu of short-term projects that students can do, and they have to choose a certain number. And the number is set up so that at least one of these has to be experiential in nature. So I have 3 that I highlighted here that are experiential in nature. Go veg. Students for 1 week go vegetarian or vegan, going cruelty-free. Students learn how to research what's cruelty-free, download apps on their phone, and they search through their products to see what is and isn't cruelty-free. They also watch a movie about experimentation on non-human animals. And with all of these, they have assignments that go with them that help them process this information. Then trash time, I have 2 versions of this. One is I have students lug their trash around for the better part of a week. And in another one, when the weather is nicer, I have them go out to community places and pick up and collect trash and look at what was in the trash and process, think about those things. Other types of experiential learning we can imagine might be doing things like doing some dog walking or helping one time at an adoption event, other things that are related to non-human animals that would be a one-time short-term event. Research shows that experiential learning really improves skills attainment, very basic things like communication, independent work styles, teamwork, problem solving, analytic skills, and critical thinking. And it improves application and understanding of theories and course concepts to the real world. What really interests me when I'm thinking about human animal studies and how I would like to improve the world for non-human animals is that research has found that even short-term experiential learning can promote civic awareness, and it can improve worldview and challenge personal values. And that's because we put people in situations that they may not ever consider being put in before. And having these experiences can help do things like change one's perspective on something, or even build empathy for a situation you might not otherwise be in. So that's experiential learning. And in the short-term view, there's also service learning, which is a term some of you might be more familiar with. Service learning is a structured learning experience that combines community service with preparation and reflection. Students engage in service learning, provide community service in response to community identified concerns, and learn about the context in which service is provided, the connection between the service and their academic coursework, and their role as citizens. It's really important in this definition that service learning is not just an event where you look up on the internet and say, oh, there's something going on, go out there and do it. I see a park cleanup event, go do it. You have to be responsible as an instructor. You have to identify community identified concerns, and you have to prepare your students for the context in which they're going to be working. And you need to build both before and after the connections between the coursework and their service. Because if we're sending students out to have a direct impact on others and on organizations, it is, oh, you guys are my presenter you still? Sorry. Is that better? Okay. So then it's important that we do a good job as instructors to help them be prepared. So another way to think of service learning is kind of something in between volunteerism and an internship. So it's not just this one-time event where you send someone out. That might be more experiential learning, but it's something a little bit more cohesive. You probably have repeated events of it, but it's not as intense or as serious as an internship. Service learning can really have a variety of levels of investment from both the instructors and the students. So at a really high level investment, you might be working directly with an organization or a cause on a project that they explicitly rely on students for. You might be working directly with someone else. In most classes, it would be a human, but in our cases, it might be a non-human animal. And these might be time-sensitive projects. So if you are doing high investment service learning, the onus is on you as an instructor to really plan, build out, and make sure that anyone who's impacted by this project has the time and the resources to participate. Medium level investment might be contributing to a community project that's already established. Students are relied on, but not exclusively relied on to meet a community need. So if a student falls through on one of these, it's not going to be a disaster. And low investment might be showing up to a one-time event, but because it's service learning, you would be connecting it to other activities, helping as part of a team. And maybe the work is not time sensitive. So if students don't do a great job, you could come in and fill in later and help whoever you're supposed to be working with. So here are some examples. Someone just said volunteering at a sanctuary. And yes, that's a great example of service learning, particularly if you do it regularly. So here's an example that I have from a class that was actually not a human animal studies class. It was an upper division research class. And we worked with the only animal shelter in the community where my university is, called Benches. And there were several service learning components. So one, we did a community engaged research project. We assessed their volunteer program because they needed someone to do research on that and they didn't have the resources, so we provided it. We also did things like develop flyers. So here's some flyers that they needed to promote for other volunteers. Students went in regularly. They either adopted a cat condo that they cleaned regularly or they walked dogs. So that's another example of service learning that we looped in. So as sociologists, if we're doing big service learning projects, we can imagine that we can provide a lot of academic skill sets that can meet with community needs. So we can wrap this type of service learning into classes that aren't even necessarily human animal studies classes. We can, if we're teaching a class on doing surveys, for example, we can do a survey for an organization like an animal shelter that might benefit from that. So, there's much more research on service learning student outcomes. It has both short-term and long-term benefits. So most research is on short-term benefits, and it shows that it improves students' world view. Sorry, I have some typos on here. Their career development, and even their academic learning is improved. So they're more invested because they've done this kind of learning. Long-term, it's been found to improve time to graduation. It's increased the likelihood of attending graduate or law school. And it's also been found to increase the likelihood of finding employment after graduation. Now, to be clear, these long-term effects have been found in places that consistently have offices of service learning and community engagement where students take multiple classes like this. What's really important, though, is that you have to plan out your projects before assigning them. These projects won't be successful unless they're well planned out. And if you're involving any community partners or members that might be impacted, you really have to discuss your plans with them. For really large projects, it's important to take the time to establish a contract with the community partners and the students outlining the expectations so that everyone knows what's going on. Ensure proper training on cultural competencies or safety protocols. So you want to make sure that the populations they're working with are safe. So you wouldn't send students to an animal sanctuary unless you felt that they were going to respect how they were trained to handle those non-human animals and how they were trained to speak to and respect those animals. And you should always consider opt-out options. So for example, in my Go Veg assignment, I understand that there might be issues like eating disorders that people don't want to disclose or financial issues, and people might not feel comfortable doing that for those reasons. So I give them a menu of projects they can do so they can opt out of that one. And there should always be clearly outlined criteria that students must meet to demonstrate they're responsible enough, or alternate routes or grade consequences if they don't follow through on these things, or if you think that they are not going to be able to participate in a full way. So they have pros and cons, and there's differences in these two kinds of learning, specifically when I'm talking about short-term experiential learning versus service learning. So experiential learning can be episodic, short-term, and it doesn't require you connecting with community partners, while service learning is going to be more engaged and there's greater potential to have direct community outcomes. So that's a pro and a con. So if you mess up a service learning project, it can have negative consequences, but ideally you have these well planned out, and this isn't a throwaway assignment. This assignment matters in the real world, and that provides more motivation to your students. Times when you might really benefit from experiential learning it would be when you have a large class size. It's really hard to keep track of what everyone's doing. So you probably don't want to have a community partner. Lower division classes, it's a smaller buy-in, undependable commitment from a student population. So if your students, so like in a liberal arts school, you can probably have fewer students in your class, you can keep better track of them. They might have more resources at their disposal than if you're at a large state school. So experiential learning might be better in one situation versus the other. And it's really great when you have a survey, you survey a variety of topics, which is great for human animal studies courses. Lots of times you go through a topic a week. You're talking about animals who are used as food, then animals who are used in entertainment. So you can come up with small projects when you have short times for each topic, and they can be easier to set up, especially if you're teaching online. Whereas with service learning, they can work really well with small class sizes, upper division classes where you might have higher investment from students. If the instructor has relationships with the community, it can help them grow those and strengthen them, or it can help you build connections with the community. And if there's a clear need in the community, offering the resources of a university in a responsible way can really be quite helpful. So I'll pop a few of these resources into the chat, and I would just like to say thank you, and thank you to everyone who is currently teaching or working on finding ways to be allowed to teach human animal studies and other relevant courses to teach students about speciesism. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Carol. That was great. And it looks like there's a number of folks in the room at the moment who do teach in human animal studies, which is amazing. And having kind of struggled with experiential learning versus service learning myself and some of my own teaching, this has been a really amazing kind of just food for thought. Haha.
And thank you for following me.
Forward.
I know that I was breathy. I have a breathing problem with my pregnancy, so I apologize. I meant to apologize in advance for that. So
that's okay. This is so I would like to open it up to questions if folks have questions. We do have some questions in from the chat, so maybe we'll just start with Victoria. The presentation, so from Ruth, the presentation was very interesting. What is the name of the Gaiman text that you drew upon?
It is in Sociology Compass, and it's titled Veganism is a Lifestyle Movement. It's her review piece that was published in 2020. Awesome. I can also put that in chat for you. Oh, sure.
That would be wonderful. Yes, thanks. And then for Miri, actually, this is a question from Carol. Would like to hear a little bit more about the methodology of your research. It looks like a combo of a lot of existing data collection and analysis and interviews. So could you maybe speak to a little bit more of your methodology?
Yeah, so I use archival data from trade journals as well as animal rights records that were deposited in archives. In the US, it's the NCSU archives that have an animal rights archive. And in the UK, it was actually the Royal British Archives that have archives for most of their animal rights organizations, like the RSPCA and the British Union for Abolition of Vivisection, that's now called Cruelty Free International. So that's one part. Another one is the interviews. And those interviews were solicited by doing ethnographic work in trade shows. So I went to every food trade show you could think of, from the Institute of Food Technology to Expo West, to Plant-Based Expo, Food Innovation Expo, just to connect with people and see what they are talking about. Same for beauty industry. And just took notes, went to the lectures, connected with people, opened up a LinkedIn page, because apparently no one would talk to you in the real world if you're not in LinkedIn. And the last part was look at USDA and other government data on animal agriculture, plant agriculture, and just talking to trade organizations, looking at their data, I've also constructed my own data set of registered companies that have any association with vegan in the UK and the US over the last 20 years to see if there were ebbs and flows, right? When it was better to open a vegan company. So multiple sources of data, and I try to triangulate all of them, or at least some of them, in every chapter that I write, depending on the research question there. So for this chapter, it was mainly industry level data from trade journals and the interviews that accompanied them. And some companies were nice enough, like Beyond Meat, to share their cash register data with me for the research.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's a really interesting methodology and drawing on a variety of different spaces. So that's great. Can you, okay, there we go. I'm not frozen anymore. So I guess just a question for Victoria. This is from Corey, drawing on, kind of building on Miri's presentation. Corey's wondering how the rise in Black-owned vegan products and restaurants have influenced motivation.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. This project is something that I've started. I started on it towards the end of last year, and it's for my master's thesis. And so I've largely been focusing on developing the topic right now. And since seeing Miri's presentation, that's opened up a whole new perspective for me to think about, you know, even just after I get the opportunity to receive this data and analyze it, there's this whole other level. And so I don't have an answer for that right now, yet I've definitely made note of that. And I can see that is an avenue for expanding this project even further. So thank you.
Awesome. So that's one of the best things about these conferences is we get ideas from each other and we get like galvanized and invigorated. So I actually did have a question for Carol, if that's okay, folks. Just maybe if you could let us know what your biggest success was with implementing experiential or service learning in your classrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually, I teach some upper division research classes and I sort of cycle through social issues that we work on. And probably my greatest success had to do with food insecurity on my campus. We did a huge project that assessed food insecurity on our campus. And because we're public sociologists, students didn't just focus, and you can imagine doing these sorts of things with non-human animal related issues too. They didn't just focus on the research, they focused on how do you get the research out there and meaningful in the world. So they focused on finding the best student activists, doing advertising campaigns, education campaigns around it as well. And we found high level of food insecurity on our campus. And then, students, a hard thing with these projects is students graduate and then the sort of fire dies down. But students identified interested students in student government and student organizations with the idea that they can keep things going in future years and brought them into the folds. And we found 64% of our student population is food insecure, which we're rural and a state school. So that wasn't too surprising, but it's higher than normal. And students kept on it and carried it through, and local stakeholders who work on food insecurity in the community were involved. So they kept on it, and we got a food shelf on our campus 2 years later. So I think that is probably the time I've been most proud of the work of my students. And we saw the quickest direct impact, I think.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that. And I think that for folks who want to embrace experiential and service learning, for me, certainly that kind of gives me a bit of a different dimension, right? So this idea of knowledge transfer and almost like legacy planning to kind of keep some of this momentum up. So yeah, thank you.
And then if you teach human animal studies classes, hopefully, I think ASI, Animals and Society Institute, keeps data. If you do the animal attitude survey, the Herzog survey before and after, but I just keep it for fun. And I find that this class every year, students change their attitudes and become less specious for just taking the class and doing projects like this.
Interesting. All right. So a pre-post too.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Okay, cool. Thank you. It is 9:30, so that is the end of our session. Does anybody have any last questions? I think there was one more question for Miri that I wanted to just kind of pop out. And again, this is from Corey. So have you come across, for Miri, any labor issues or workers' rights issues in this vegan so-called, and these are Corey's words, moral market? So just about grassroots activism and stuff, drawing on some of that knowledge and literature coming out.
If we're looking at the American and UK focused companies, not surprisingly, no, actually. They're mostly very conscious of ethical work relations. And even if we're looking, a lot of them use coconut oil, they will use ethically sourced coconut oil, right? So for those entrepreneurs, and even if you look at huge companies right now, like Beyond Meat or Kite Hill, they take care of their workers and they take care of their supply chain, and they're trying to make efforts to also make sure that their packaging is sustainable. So their ethics kind of, it spans beyond, but the moment we see meat companies coming in and dairy companies coming in, we can't say the same for them, right? So it literally is, who is your founder? How were you founded in this market, to see the other ethical aspects of their workflow.
Thank you very much. That gives some really good, again, food for thought to kind of move forward with. And yeah, so if there's no more last questions, I think what we'll do is we'll maybe stop the official component of the panel and leave it open for a bit if we want to chat or everything like that. That would be lovely. So thank you very much to our three presenters, Carol, Miri, and Victoria. This was a wonderful wrap up to the first day of the International Association of Vegan Sociologists Conference for 2021. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of you who organized and made this possible.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.